I'm Mike Hoggarth. I'm a director at a specialist consultancy firm called Ember.
I'm Steve Bent from Blue Sky. I'm the proposition lead for the Seals element.
Simon Hunt, I head up the products and solutions for the customer management division.
Hi, I'm James Hinchliffe. I run voice within customer management and trading.
I'm Phil Hoggarth, so I head up the trading work within Capita.
I was reminded there was a term we used to use in the contacts industry many years ago, which was, isn't it bizarre that we've got this department called service, which is spending all of its time trying to get people off of the phone, and then we'd go down the corridor to sales, which spends all its time trying to get people onto the phone, and even in this digital world, it still feels a little bit like we've got those silos and that thinking, which is I think what you were alluding to there, Phil. The final piece I just sort of wanted to touch on is just a personal experience of how powerful thinking about this can be and how quite transformative. And a term I often use is about how little moments can create movements. And many years ago I'd done a lot of work with American Express through the years, who I think is a fantastic business in terms of thinking about data, proactivity and engagement. And I helped set up something that they ended up calling, or we called actually, the welcoming team. And it was really, if you remember the days when you got your Amex card and you had to activate it, and they called it the activation team, and it was very much a security process. And what we did was say, well, look, this is the first exposure of American Express customer to that brand, to that business. So let's welcome them rather than activate them. Let's put our arms metaphorically around them and just think about what we can do at this very first exposure. And what we uncovered through data and through research was that the people in the UK that were taking an American Express card were thinking of it as a travel accessory. It was a backup when I travelled, when I went overseas. It wasn't really an everyday spending card. And so through this welcoming process where you just had to read your card details, cover a couple of security questions, and your card was activated, what we did was insert a few seconds of a statement, and that statement was, oh, don't forget, you can now use your card in Sainsbury's. And that was, believe it or not, the most successful cross-sell proactive statement that American Express had with their customers, because what it did, just that one sentence, changed people's mindsets to what the brand was about, how they used the card. And where we didn't give that sentence, you saw a completely different user profile in terms of how the card was used. So I suppose one of the things I sort of maybe should try and help touch on in this session is it's not always about the hard sell and the push. There are some really smart things still going on, and that was many years ago, and there's been some other brilliant examples. So perhaps we can touch on examples really. What we had laid out within this theme of from passive to proactive was a set of questions, and I think it would help the panel to understand where the most interest is on this. So if I just sort of go through the five areas and just sort of a show of hands again about where your interest is. You can vote more than once. That's absolutely fine. So the first one we said we were going to touch on, or if there was the interest, we would. Is around this idea of personalisation and when it becomes intrusion, when it becomes irritating. So this is about the balance of proactivity versus brand, I think. So who's got some interest in exploring those particular areas? Okay, right, interesting, thank you. And the second was about innovative uses of data and performance management. Some of the stuff I think Phil touched on there. What have we seen? Where are the ethical and practical limits of this? Who's got some? Okay, a couple of people there. We need to make sure that when we're talking ethics, we're not talking about a place north of Kent. That's quite important in these debates. The third was about what does the agent and the team manager of the future look like? So again, where are the skills? What do we need to be thinking about in terms of the personality and how we motivate and reward them? Who's got that as an issue? Okay, a few more there, interesting. The fourth was about GDPR and understanding if this inhibits our potential or supports it in some way. How do we mitigate the risks of greater regulatory scrutiny? Who needs to understand a bit more about GDPR? One, two of you. Okay, great. In a building hosted by lawyers. That's really interesting. Thank you. And how can analytics, as the fifth area, how can analytics better fulfill its potential to support these engagements and drive more value? Who's got analytics as a sort of question in their area? So one or two. Okay. So it feels like it's more of a people focus, which I think is quite interesting. So I'm going to start the first question then, really, and perhaps Simon, if I come to you first, which is just about picking on Phil's theme. Are we set up for proactive service? And that's not just about structures and data, but I think skills as well. And what underpins it, I'm just picking up on Phil's theme there, is cost measures as much as structures, and whether we use the right measures to drive value. So just, I suppose, first, are we set up? And then the second is, in your experience, and everyone can answer this, what either should be the big thing to think about, or what have you seen has been the big thing that has drastically changed the value opportunity? An example of something that you've seen or would like to see that would radically change it. So big question, Simon, perhaps if you want to kick it.
Thank you. Great one to start with. So are we set up to do it? I think we're set up in our interest to do it. I think when you look at the sales and service slant, that where it's in the business interest to have a conversation with a customer, we'll offer that channel and it'll be very easy to get to. Where a customer wants to have a conversation with the business, we can make that very, very difficult. And I think the customer feels that. I think they know that, pressing 1 to get through to the sales team will mean that you get served faster in the old way of IVR, and they'll find new tactics to do that. So for me, I'm worried about the imbalance between sales and service. And when it's a proactive conversation that we want to have with the customer, we will be very available. Where it's a proactive conversation the customer wants to have with us, then sometimes we can be less keen. And I think that over time I think they probably will punish us for it. It feels very much in our favour rather than theirs. I think the thing for me is that this is about conversations, and I know that sounds very trite. Of course it's about conversations. But whether it's a sales conversation or a service conversation, it's an exchange of information between two people to get to an outcome. And those are the skills that we need to invest in. I think sometimes our agents are just an interface for our POR systems. That actually, because the customer can't serve themselves through that system, we put an agent in place, and that customer will, that agent will take on the customer's request to do that. So, are we set up? I think we set up for it in pockets. I think we set up for it in our interest. And I think we're teaching customers in some of that onboarding that to begin with, we're really happy to talk to them person to person. But as that relationship goes on, then I think the messages they hear is being pushed to automation and to self-serve.
Okay, thank you. James?
Yeah, I think to touch on, from my point of view in the sales arena, to touch on the areas of the agent and what the new type of agent that we're looking for. And we're asking a lot more from our guys on the phones, from not only just creating one sale, but they might be multiple sales, and within a compliant arena as well. So they have to hit a 95, 97% compliance score. At the same time, we've got things like the national living wage pushing up wages. So we're up against the likes of IKEA or Aldi with their shelf stackers earning potentially more than our guys can do on the phones, which we need to readdress that balance. And we're trialling with one of our clients to looking like we're going to pay our advisors 25-30% more as a base salary to help encourage the right type of advisor to join our organisation. I mean, one of those contracts that we're working on, we're asking our advisors to toggle between 10 different systems and screens. The amount of training that's required. So we really want to encourage this to be a career for these guys. And we don't want to be the lowest common denominator. And I think with GDPR and the way that data is going to be more finite, we need to invest more into our guys, because every single piece of data is going to be a little pot of gold that we need to convert. So I'm quite confident about the future that if we pay more and we're going to have better conversations, we're going to have better quality of data because people have opted in, that our conversion rates will mean that the cost of sale won't dramatically increase, but we'll be able to retain our guys. So I think that's one of the big things that we're focused on.
Okay, thank you. Steve?
Yeah, I totally agree with everything the guys are saying, and it's a really, really big topic for us in terms of the conversation. I don't think conversation's tried, but thanks for that, Sam. That's our world of Blue Sky. So we work with people in terms of conversations, be it web, be it leadership, be it frontline service and sales, and so. For us, the biggest thing in kind of any of our propositions right now is that the lines are blurred. Particularly in the last 3 years, we're seeing a huge shift in what we're being asked to do with our clients and what we're experiencing within the organisations that we go into. And the blurred line is amongst this whole Phil's point around sales versus service. And the bit for us is around if we were to set up a business, right, the four of us, and we were servicing you guys as clients, and any one of you ring any one of us, the reality is that any one of us, no matter what our specialty is, if I'm the data guy and Phil's the relationship guy, no matter which of us picks up the phone or goes to the meeting with you, we're going to serve you, right? That's kind of thing. And you guys would kind of go, well, yeah, of course. And I think that that's what our customer base just kind of expects now. And the shift that we're seeing is really interestingly, it's coming through more strongly in the retail and field space, where customers just expect that things that they can be served. And in the old world, if you look at kind of telco retail, the old world of the people that they were hiring in those sort of situations were, pretty hard-nosed salespeople that if you didn't perform on a given, in some of the organisations we've worked with in a retail space, if you didn't perform within a week, month, 6-week period in a retail telco, you were out the door, so you needed to be able to perform from that sort of space. And actually what we're seeing from some recent diagnostics we've done across a couple of different organisations is that 50% and more of the footfall is now about service. So there's a real huge great shift in what that is. So the lines are blurry for us. The challenge that we've all got as people is that you can't have this 5-person business. We're talking about scale of thousands or 2,000 or 5,000 operators. So we kind of need to look at what it is. So we think it's really important that we maybe look at the 80-20 rule in our inductions. Typically speaking, with 20% of the content, 20% of the knowledge, you can answer 80% of the queries. So there's a lot of complexity within the 10 different systems, but actually we think that's the threshold. Getting past that bit and knowing what's going on is really important from our point of view. And so we've, like Phil, I have had a massive bugbear with the terminology sales through service for a long time. It's been around for a long time, and we're in a new economy, so we think it needed something different. So we're classing it the value experience. And the critical element of what the value experience is versus customer experience is, and the most important thing from our side that any of our clients or any business needs to think about is the first thing that needs to be experienced from a value perspective is the customer must experience value from that conversation. If we're chasing value, it will happen, but it's a side effect and it's a result of the customer experiencing value from that conversation in the first hand. So if I walk into a large retail store that sells laptops and stuff, I won't use any brand names in case offend. But if you walk in and say, I want that laptop over that laptop, can you tell me the difference? And the guy says, this one's got a 15.1 inch screen and a 8 gig hard drive. I say, thanks. I knew that before I walked into the shop. So it's that piece that we think it's really important that they must add value to any conversation, whether it's retail, whether it's field, and loads of organisations seem to be starting now. We're experiencing it, right? So some of your competitors are starting to plough money into the fact that the guys that answer the service calls in business, in retail, in field, and in general customer service are starting to plough money into, we must answer these customers' queries and find out if they need anything more from us today and add value to them.
Thanks. Phil?
I think it's a cultural thing for me. I think the answer's relatively simple. Deploying it is the complex part of it. I think we all understand what needs to happen and how we should structure things. In reality, though, the industry, contact centres, businesses have been structured for so long around a service is a cost of failure, it's a cost of demand. We want to eradicate it, we want to self-serve, we want to move everything online, that we feel comfortable in a space of talking about average handling times and PCA and average speed of answer and first-time fixes. And I think because that is the common knowledge and common language of everybody in the sector, while we know the answer is to spend a little bit more time and create value and add value, and we go into things like model office, and we create a model office, and we eradicate average handling times, and we eradicate service levels, and those things never go beyond small model offices ultimately, because everybody still retracts to type and then wants to understand around average handling times. Well, we won't measure it, but we will look at it. And then it becomes cyclical, and you start putting the barriers back around it again because it's comfortable and it's where we're at. And so I think, could we do it? Yes, we can. And we do see pockets of it where people have got it absolutely right. And it tends to be organisations that have come from the online space, people like Amazon, etc., have come from the online where their systems are singular, focused. It allows the agent to focus less on toggling between 10 screens while trying to create value for an organisation, into being singularly focused on that conversation and how to extract value and impart value ultimately. So I think in answer how we set up, I think we can deliver it. It's a cultural and a comfort blanket, I think, that we've got to break out of to move into that value interaction. We see that every day across the majority of our clients, is that siloed, towered approach where everyone has their own P&Ls. Nobody sets themselves up in a way to not drive value for their customers. But ultimately I think we get caught up in a structure within a business where, well, it's the right thing to do, but I haven't got the P&L for it. You know, it'll add cost to me, and Joe Bloggs over there gets the value because he's head of sales. And I think that structure, I think, drives the behaviour that you're talking about. And you're right, you know, the more we move into the subscription services, the more value we expect as consumers to get out of that subscription service. You know, if I'm going to be tied in for 12, 18, 24 months, I expect something more than what I would expect if I'd just gone out and bought an individual product and, like you say, you know, moved on from it. And we haven't quite got to that. Breaking down the barriers within the organisations, thinking of the customer and its life cycle, and how do we add value from it and look at the return on the investment that's needed to drive that value over the life cycle across all of the departments that will always be there, but how do we just look at it across the entire life cycle and not worry about service P&Ls, retention P&Ls.
One of the issues that I've sort of picked up on, and I think Mark was alluding to, and you mentioned, and I'll come to you with this question, Simon, so get ready. You mentioned Amazon, you know, and Jeff Bezos has clearly stated he doesn't want, you know, human-to-human engagement in Amazon, right? If that happens, he treats it as a failure for interrupting someone's life, and their sales is all around the digital sell, right? You know, we think you might like this because of these other, you know, which is very effective, very powerful. So what's the role of the human sales component or the proactive service in that sort of environment where it's subscription-based, it's a, you know, rolling, you know, relationship that should be digital by default?
Yeah, and I think this is the difference between an instruction and a conversation. So if I know what I want and I'm asking the organisation for it, why do I need a person to do that? You know what I mean? To take that instruction. Now, there's a challenge of that because then you may lose an opportunity to upsell and to cross-sell. But in the customer's minds, if they're very clear of what they want to buy and that's presented, then I don't know, I would feel that as a consumer that it's not value add to speak to a person about that. I just want to click, and that's kind of the Amazon model for me. So I think when they know what they want, and there's no value in that human conversation, interjecting one for the customer feels awkward. I think some of the challenge we have in our contact centres is there's just so much noise. We confuse conversations and instructions. Customers are just telling us to do something, and an agent there is there interpreting that and just putting it into the system. Where we want to get to is the value add of the conversations. But because we've struggled to automate some of those instructions, and perhaps our other channels aren't, you know, set up to do that, they all get mixed in together. So it's really difficult to make that value call between what is my contact centre generating in true value versus stuff that I don't want them to be doing. So I think that's a really blurred line. So it's very linked for me about streamlining what contacts we want in a person-to-person contact, where they add value, and what instructions should just be automated in most cases. I think the other thing, and it was a point that you raised earlier, with the sticker on the credit card. I used to work in financial services, and we put a sticker on the credit card when you didn't have to activate the card. To hoodwink you to calling in so we could upsell and cross-sell to you. Now, it's that type of behaviour that customers get very cynical of. And we almost spoil it for ourselves then, don't we? And I think the industry has moved on quite a bit from there. But I do think we need to be very genuine in our opportunities for those conversations. It needs to be a true conversation where we can value add, not that kind of double glazing kind of sale that I know what I'm going to give you at the end of the conversation. I'm just kind of, hooking you in. It needs to be a conversation.
This question of value is an interesting, because James, I'll come to you, is that what we perceive as value creation is not, a customer might be completely ambivalent. So, I mean, you every day are forcing in a positive way, forcing your way into their lives to try and offer value. Yeah. So how do you do that?
I think one of the tough things we have is, I think Phil's touched on it, that we're not necessarily getting all the information up front that a brand holds. So what we'll tend to just get is a basic form, is a name, address, a telephone number, maybe some demographics. If they're a customer, maybe what they're currently purchasing. But that doesn't give us the full picture. So for us to have a proper informed discussion and making sure that it's relevant, it's timely, we need more information about their lifestyle, their other interactions they've had with that brand. These are the key bits that will just change our world and ultimately the clients. So we could really reduce the cost of sale if we had more information for us to be able to do our pre-work on the data before we actually go live into the live environment. And I think that's the biggest ask that we always have with our clients. Yeah, I think ultimately if it's timed right and it's relevant to them and it's in the right medium, I think we've found that customers have been fine with having that information. Even we've got this new tool, the drop basket scenario. So we were very concerned that it would be a Big Brother type of world where they haven't fulfilled the sale. It's a drop basket, and we're calling those people within 2 minutes. And we're converting really high, and out of, say, 100 of those calls, we'll only get one person say, "How on earth have you found out this information?" So we're actually finding that if it's well timed and it's relevant, it's never a problem for the customer.
And it's a conversation. I mean, it ultimately ends in a sale, but the starting point is a conversation. So it's around, were you struggling? Is there anything, did something at our end fail? Is there something that we need to be aware of that we can support you with? I think it's the positioning of that interaction is as important as the content of it. To get over that, well, how did they know that? How would they possibly know that? We're going to have to think harder about that as GDPR becomes more prolific. There are certain things that we can do today that we won't be allowed to do tomorrow. And it's how do we still, because consumers are always telling us, make it about me, make it personal to me, make it relevant to me. And then on the flip side, we've got things like GDPR, which is around trying to stop the encroach of that over-personalisation. Have we found the balance yet? I don't think we have found that balance. I think we're still, you've got some elements are on the very secure side and we don't do anything with it for fear of, intruding. And we've got other elements where you still see that they take it too far, and I think that's why GDPR's come in. But how to find that balance, I think it'll differ from organisation to organisation, depending on the customer base, the demographics of their customers. Are they online customers to start with, or are they traditionally retail store? And the age profile will vary how much they will accept personalisation, in inverted commas, being put upon them effectively.
Yeah, and it depends how. So in the mobile space, for instance, we obviously know how people are using their mobile phones, right? How much data they're using, whether they're in the country, whether they're abroad, what SMS they're using, all that kind of stuff. But to make it personal, for me, if someone rang me from 3 and I'm a 3 customer and said, "Hey Phil, we've realised that you are doing X, Y, and Z, which has triggered some things," prevent that from happening. I can give you this, it's £3 a month. You have been spending £8, £9, £10, £20 because you've been doing this. Just thought it'd be something you'd be interested in. That feels to me like, oh, someone's actually caring about me. They're trying to create value for me. Ultimately, it's creating repetitive, planned value for you. But I would see it as actually someone's taking the time to think about how I am using the products, and have realised there's a more cost-effective way for me to use that product. That is personalisation. It's a way to drive brand advocacy, and it's a way to get over that, for me, when does it feel Big Brother? I wouldn't see that as being Big Brother. I'd see that as, oh, great. I haven't waited till, the third bill of being charged another £20 that I wasn't expecting, because I've done something that I just wasn't aware I was doing, wasn't aware of the
charges that was going to come with it, etc. And I think that it's just about understanding what's the customer experience element of it, and then flipping that back to then have the conversation with them around, we've noticed, we believe this is of value to you. That would be the way I would approach it.
James mentioned sort of timing for me. I wonder if we invest enough in the timing of that. We almost get so excited we fall over ourselves, don't we? There's been a drop basket, quick, we need to speak to them right now. And it might be the right time to speak to them for the sale, but we've got all this data about people's wants and desires. I just wonder, and maybe people have got a view about whether we put in sufficient focus on the when. When's the best time to contact? You could come to me with the best offer in the world. If I haven't got time at that moment, it's going to be damn hard work, really, really hard work. And we've got lots of data about timing. We know when a customer contacts us, and there might be a pattern in that. From a mobile perspective, we must have lots of data about when they're available. So I think, and again, it's tried to, right offer at the right time. And I wonder, I don't know if anybody's got a view, whether we put in as much focus into the timing as we are in the personalisation of offer. Because the timing of any offer, actually, if I've got time to talk about it, that will lead to potentially something interesting.
I think it's timing and also value. I think often when we're trying to sell or interact with a customer, we're trying to essentially give them something that we believe has a value for us as opposed to a value to them. So we come at it from the wrong angle, I think. It's all about, well, we've got this great product. Clearly, you're going to want me to talk to you about it. But unless it's relevant to them, we create products and offerings en masse into the marketplace and expect that 100% of our customer base, well, why would they not want to talk about this great new product that we've created? But is it relevant to that particular customer that we're talking to? Because if it's not, we've lost them from a sale, and we've probably lost them as a customer in reality. If we
There's a fundamental thing for me and for us here, that I think it's about just a shift in mindset. So exactly as Phil's saying, it just requires a shift in mindset. And whilst it can be big and whilst it can be scary, and we've got the siloed or the tower mentality that we've talked about over here, actually our experience is that the shift in mindset, the shift in the conversation that the advisors are having with the people, is the biggest driver of that is one thing: we must shift the conversation that we're having with those advisors throughout the whole business. And how we do that is with the shift in mindset. And if the mindset is, as Phil's saying, that instead of us saying we've got a great product, we want to go out with this, we think that will drive value, big data that says who's it going to drive value to, get down to the levels of specificity, and we kind of go, we might have missed a point, but most of the time we're getting it right, so it's fine. Actually, even the timing thing aside, although I definitely think that can add value as well, the bigger piece for me is around, if we're actually ringing this customer from a service perspective to add some value to the customer, and that's our mindset, then what will fall out the back of that? And there may be a kind of learning curve where we've got to bite the bullet and go for I'm calling them up to serve them. But as we've heard from the examples already, these guys have already shared, lots of really great value has been added by the welcome to serve kind of conversations at the start of we talked about the start of the session. And for me, that is just one example. It's a really obvious one, right? Because it's right at the start of the life cycle. Did we get the sale right? Have we given you all the products that you should have? Is this going to work in the way that you want? But actually, in a huge program that we've done across a B2B telco, what they found was nobody was offering any value, right? They were getting a ton of value from 4% of the population, 96% were doing nothing. And they've driven up a huge uplift, a ridiculous uplift in revenue, purely by shifting the mindset. So there was very little process-driven work needed to be done, very little knowledge needed to be upskilled in, just literally a shift in mindset in the business says, guys, if they ring you up with a problem, have a think about, is there a part of our product offering that could actually be the reason why they got the problem or the answer to the problem? And that shift in mindset has been hugely successful. And what's really interesting to me, and I think it's a really massive learn from our perspective in a performance improvement world, is the shifts in the conversation at the end. The clients come back to says, we've listened to another 100 calls since the start of the program, and they don't seem to be that different. And I've gone, God, yeah, you're right. Weird how it's delivered double-digit figures of millions in value whenever there isn't that big a shift in the conversation. The difference is in here. The difference is in here for the business and in there for the advisor. Really good question, Joe, because I think this is where where the mindset shift needs to take on something a bit more robust. So this is one of the challenges that they faced was with the model that we proposed because it was so successful. Collectively, when I say we, I mean the royal we with them. It started to mean that the service agents were now going to start earning more than the sales agents, and in a very large telco that could not happen, so they had to cap that stuff. Weirdly, it didn't have a massive impact apart from the top. Those 4% of guys that were selling before, they were the only ones who were hacked off about that. The other 96% were okay. But what I think it moves to is the Google thing that's been mentioned earlier on today is what we know, if you've looked at the Laszlo Bock book, what we know is that those guys reward based on output. So two guys can be sitting beside each other. It's a totally different world from ours, right, programming, but one guy can be earning $50,000 and the other person can be on $1 million a year because the output that he produces is worth that. So they drive the value that they get, which just takes it off the slate. You get a cut. It's not a target, it's not a reward, you just get a share of whatever you deliver. And therefore if I drive value to the business, I earn value for myself.
Measurement's a really interesting key point here. My son is heading off on a rugby, 17, he's heading off on a rugby tour to Australia. And I just wanted to check up on his tariff and whether I was going to be hit with a huge bill. So I had the conversation with a fantastic guy. Actually, he was really helpful. Absolutely understood the issue. Said, no, look, you're on a feel at home package. There's no issue. Da, da, da. He said, but by the way, he said, just tell your son when he's on an aeroplane, make sure the phone is on airplane mode. Not just because it's safer, he said, but if he is using it without that, there's a chance he'll be picking up the satellite signals and your costs will be huge, right? And I thought, I'd never twigged that was a possibility, right? And so that was a proactive service statement. It made me feel brilliant about that. And I've come, now to you've potentially lost hundreds of pounds of satellite signal bill. You haven't really sold me anything, but there is a real value measure there. And I'm wondering how, that sort of longer term value component gets picked up. So
it depends how you determine value, isn't it? To Mike's point, value isn't always about another product or, coming away with a pound sign at the end of it. And that's why we've been quite specific about not talking about revenue generation through those interactions. We've been talking about value generation because value can be loyalty, can be NPS, brand advocacy, the ability to retain that customer. And that's, when we looked at the slides where we had sales, service and retention, on the final one, that's why I took away retention, because if you get the upfront onboarding of a customer right, and you get the account management, even if it's just a service, if you get the account management right and you can impart value on them, you effectively do away with retention because it's managed within that account management interaction structure. And so I think it becomes difficult then to put what we like as a comfort blanket of metrics because value is potentially a subjective metric, right? It's not an average handling time, it's not a revenue, it's not a margin from that call. Unless there's a product sold, there isn't necessarily an end of call marketed value that you can say agent X drove £30 worth of value in that call. Because in a service environment, the value comes from the fact that we've delighted the customer, we've imparted some information or knowledge on them that they weren't expecting, that they didn't call about, and we've turned essentially what is always in a service environment a cost of failure, a failure somewhere in a system, a process that's meant they've had to call up, something that we've done wrong. If they can leave that feeling that we've added value, the pound signs come later on when they don't leave at the end of the 12 months or they don't move to the next cheapest provider for a 12 pence reduction on their kilowatt hour or whatever it is. I think it's about looking at value, not trying to put a revenue or margin sign, because ultimately when you start and talk about those metrics, it drives a different behavior. So if you start targeting agents on revenue and margin, ultimately the value starts to erode for the customer because you keep them on the phone longer than you probably needed to. You bombard them with products that aren't relevant because you're chasing a revenue target or a margin target, not a joint value for both parties.
We've trialled something recently with a client. It's in a regulatory environment, and they didn't want to pay any bonus. So it's a bit counterintuitive for us in the sales environment. We want to recruit the right people who are hungry to earn bonus, but equally talk about not driving the wrong behaviours. So what we eventually came up with together with the client was actually that the advisor still received a bonus, but it was purely on quality, compliance, and they could get other uplifts based on certain terminology that they used. And we've seen that they've actually hit the sales glide path because we're bonusing them quality conversations. And I'll be honest with you, when we first discussed it, I didn't think it would work, but it's been fantastic. And now we're about 3 months into that. We are bringing in a KPI and a sales bonus with detractors. It's always paid on net, normally month in arrears. But we've set the tone with the advisors from day one. This is about a quality call. We want you to get a sale. That's the ultimate outcome. But if you have a good quality conversation with these customers, they'll want to buy, as long as it, again, goes back to the right message and the right time.
Just before we break, we launched a white paper just a couple of weeks ago, actually, about looking at the frontline skills of the future and what we need to recruit and think about. And it sort of comes partly back to your point, which is one of those is all about the ability to detect nuance and sort of high EQ. And so that, that's that ability to sort of twig, how do I back off and how do I rescue the brand rather than push for the sale. And again, I think that comes back to then how you motivate, how you reward, how you control. So I think we're going to take a short coffee break now. One other anecdote I'm reminded of is I was doing some work for a utility energy company years ago. I'll keep them anonymous, where they were doing very hard sell outbound, and we were doing some analytics on their calls, and one of the calls went through to this guy, and they were saying, look, if you can share with me your bill, I'll see what discount I can offer. And him saying, I don't have a bill, I don't pay for electric. And the agent was on this script, so he said, well, let's see how else I can help you reduce. He said, look, I don't have it. And then the agent suddenly twigged, a minute too late, really, and said, well, how come you don't have a bill? And he said, it's because I've drilled through the wall and I've tapped into the neighbour. So you want to ring him, his bill's gone through the roof. Right? And that was a genuine call. So look, I think we're going to break for coffee for 15 minutes, Joe, something like that. And then we'll come back in here with a bit of work to do and more discussion. So thanks so far.